Hey guys, welcome back. If you're in the market for a Ferrari 360, make sure you watch this video. I'm going to pass on some of the knowledge that I have through the buying process and having owned one of these cars for a little while now to you, and try and save you a little bit of your hard-earned money and help you get a good car. First off, great choice with the Ferrari 360. It's an exceptional car, but I get it, it is an aging supercar and it is a little bit scary. But don't worry, we're going to walk around mine, I'm going to point out all the common things, so when you go see yours, you know what you're looking for. Let's take a look. Now the first thing I want to mention here, guys, is the spec of the 360 you're looking at. Now obviously if you like blue, buy a blue one. If you like yellow, buy a yellow one. But certainly when it comes to red, being the iconic colour, you're going to pay a bit of a premium, and there's no way around that. There's no real tips I can give you to get money off of that. That's just the way the market goes. But certainly some of the options add to the car's value, and certainly the desirability of it. Things like the Scuderia shields on the wings here. Now, when you're looking at a car, if it's claiming to have these, which were a particularly pricey factory option, make sure it's not a cheap sticker, make sure it is actually the proper badge which is recessed into the wing, and these were the genuine factory items. Now another item which was particularly sought after from the factory was the Challenge grille on the rear. Now a lot of people believe that this grille is straight off of the Challenge Stradale 360s, but it's actually an entirely different item, which is quite unusual. But nonetheless, it's a really nice finishing touch on the rear of a 360, and again, you should expect to pay some premium to get one with that on. Now whatever colour you choose, you're going to want to pop the frunk, as it's affectionately known, and have a look at the original paint code sticker under here. Make sure it is there and make sure it matches whatever colour the car is. Also in the front, you had your optional 6-disc CD changer, so you could listen to all your 90s pop, must have. Some of them as well also had the car cover. I've never actually taken that out of the packet for fear of never being able to get it back in again. And you also had the toolkit. Now these toolkits, really nice item if the car you're looking at has still got it in there. A lot of owners will remove these and sell them separately from the car. The cheap Magnuson toolkit, that's mine. That's nothing to do with the Ferrari. Now within the toolkit, you should have a complete set. There should be no holes in here with nothing in it. And each individual one of these items is particularly expensive. So don't let a seller fob you off by saying, you know, it's only the pliers that are missing. These go for a heck of a lot of money on eBay, I think like £300–400. Now beyond that as well, you should also have a set of spare belts. Mine were actually used. I can see these are old belts. But nonetheless, it doesn't really matter, the belts are relatively cheap. And what you've also got is a full set of relays, fuses, a little fuse puller, and some light bulbs in there as well. Now, let's move on to the things which will commonly go wrong. Now, I'll start by stating the Ferrari 360 is an exceptionally tough and well-engineered car. And these problems, you know, a lot of it is just common sense and things that can happen on every car, but I'll do my best to try and point out some of the areas that you want to double check on a 360. Now one area that is notorious on the 360 are ball joints. So the ball joints are notoriously bad for wearing out quickly. 10–12,000 miles is probably all you're going to get from them. Now the whole premise behind the suspension and ball joint setup is it's very sort of race car like, for want of a better word. So the whole idea behind it is it would be used for a heat, maybe used for a couple races, and then the whole hub would be getting swapped anyway. So sort of long life was never a concern when these parts were initially designed. However, we're obviously using the cars to drive to the shops, drive to work, you know, using them sort of all seasons. So you can expect that you're going to need to replace the ball joints. Now unless you've taken a 4-post lift with you to view a car, we don't really have any way of checking when the car's stationary. Thankfully, when it's on the move, clunking and banging and a certain feel from the steering is a dead giveaway that the ball joints are worn and needing replaced. But we'll get into that a bit later. Check for stone chips to the rear of the car. A lot of people don't realise this, but the rear of the 360 is actually slightly wider than the front. So anything that comes off of those front tyres is going to get pinged backwards and it's going to hit the bodywork or another part of the car. So it does come from the factory with these little shields on here. You can see they're getting a little tired on my car. They've done their job, they've protected the paint. Maybe need to refresh them at some point. But the main thing, guys, is just to make sure there's no sort of war wounds on this rear quarter. I do have one, and again, it's in quite a notorious place for it. You can see here, it's not too bad. Maybe some touch up will get that. But again, these are all negotiation points that you can look at with the seller. The other thing while we're in this area is in this vent, if it's been raining or you've washed the car, you'll find water tends to gather in this area here. So check the paint here, make sure there's no corrosion. And again, it's not the end of the world, it's always repairable, but negotiation points. Now another problem sometimes spoken about on these 360s is the gearbox bushing or gearbox mount. What happens is it's basically just this big ball of rubber. It starts to wear out, it starts to sag, and then the car doesn't feel as sharp as it did during gear changes. Now, there's a really easy way to spot this, particularly if you haven't driven the car yet, and that is get behind the car and take a look at the height of the exhausts. Seems a bit unusual, but the gearbox and the exhaust are actually one unit in there. So as the exhaust starts to droop low, it's a good indicator that that gearbox bushing is most likely quite worn and it's going to need replaced at some point soon. Next, get into the heart of the car. So that famous engine bay that we can see through the rear glass. I believe the 360 was the first car to do that. If I'm wrong, I'm sure you guys can tell me in the comments. But nevertheless, we want to get in here. First thing to check, the coolant tank. Now, I can't stress this enough. Do not open this if there's even a slight bit of heat and you can feel it with your hands. Do not open this. But if the car is cold, unscrew this, have a look at the coolant, and what we're looking to identify is we should have nice clean coolant topped up to sort of the bottom of the reservoir that you can see here, and there should be absolutely no oily residue or spots in there. These engines use quite an old school heat exchanger, which basically cools the gearbox oil between the coolant of the engine. Now when they go bad, fluids start to mix and we can spot it in here. Now left alone, if that gets into the gearbox, it corrodes components and pretty much the gearbox is fit for the bin. So yeah, we definitely want to make sure there's no oily residue in here. If there is, walk away. If the car you're looking at is an F1 gearbox as well, you should be able to hear the pump when you open the driver's door, and it should sound something like this, not wildly different. Now if it does sound different from that, or wildly different, or just inherently broken, the pumps are notoriously expensive, but there is an Alfa Romeo part that you can get as well that can be modified slightly to make fit. If you're suffering from that, let me know and I can ping you over the Alfa Romeo part number. So the car passes all those checks. Seems good so far, so onto the test drive you go. So what you're going to want, guys, is a sort of winding road like the one I'm on here. Ignore the Golf GTI that will inevitably be stuck to your rear bumper right up your arse trying to race you, and concentrate in the car. Here's some of the things to look for. So probably the first thing you guys are going to notice is trans noise. So that's differential and gearbox noise. You may be able to hear it off mine. I'm coming to a hill here. I'll shut up and see if the camera can capture it. So you hear that little bit of noise? Now these cars are getting on for 21, 22 years old. So what happens is if the box has ever had any work done on it, which is probably pretty inevitable, maybe a synchro got replaced or the diff got cleaned up or something happened, when they dismantle it and put it back together, theory goes, nothing ever goes back together exactly the way it came apart. So the gears get an uneven wear pattern on them. And that's what you're hearing. Now lots of 360 owners, and you can verify this on the forums for yourself, lots of 360 owners live with varying degrees of gearbox and diff noise. So unless it's really, really bad sounding, don't worry too much about it. Certainly if it sounds like mine, I've obviously driven this car for a good number of miles now. Various very well clued up mechanics have driven it and they haven't uttered a word about it. So as long as it's not really, really noisy, don't worry too much about the trans noise, particularly if you're coming from a normal car or an Audi R8 or something like that. It's actually kind of akin to the Nissan GT-R. Second, steering. So the steering on these is really, really direct. It should feel no less like a go-kart. If you turn in, the car should immediately go that direction. Now, one of the problems I had on this car when I first bought it is when I would pitch into a corner, kind of like this, if I let go of the steering wheel, you guys will see here, it self-centers like any other car. Now, it wasn't doing that initially. That was a track rod end and ball joint issue. So the steering, really, really direct. If you let go of that steering wheel, it should self-center. If it doesn't, something going on with the front suspension. Could be worn ball joints, could be track rod end, which is nothing really, really bad. But just remember, Ferrari parts and labour tend to be expensive. So bear that in mind, use it as a negotiation tool. There goes the Golf. Don't give in to it, you're better than that. Next thing, gear changes. So obviously this will depend on whether you're driving a manual car or an F1 box car. Obviously this is an F1 box car. As you can see, it's doing the gear changes for me right now in auto mode. And that's the first thing I would say really, is don't be put off by an F1 360. The gearboxes take a lot of stick, but I actually really like it. It's very fitting of the era of Ferrari that this is. Yes, it's slow if you're comparing it to, you know, a bang up-to-date, modern-day dual clutch system, but for the era, the gear changes were exceptional. So on the F1 cars, if you're in sport mode, you're going to get quicker, more aggressive gear changes. Now, on the test drive, obviously you're limited by time and miles, and you've probably got the owner sat next to you, so flick it into sport mode right away would be my recommendation. Because if there's a problem with the gearbox, it's going to rear its head when it's trying to do these really fast, snappy shifts. Problem indicator number 1. You're driving along just like this, you maybe give it a little bit of stick, in auto, the car jumps down, it grabs maybe a gear or two down, and off you go. If it hangs in neutral, and you find, you know, you're just revving like you would a normal car had you dropped it into neutral and hit the boot, your clutch is very likely on the way out. So one of the very early indicators of a clutch problem is if it's catching neutral rather than selecting gears as you go along. So make sure that's not happening. Test number 1, guys. Get up to 4th gear. Foot fully off the throttle, sport mode on. Pull the downshift paddle. Listen closely to what's going on behind you. Now the reason we do that is we're testing for a weak synchro mesh. Now if the synchro mesh is starting to go out, what you're going to get is it'll crunch going into gear. The most common synchro meshes to go are the 1st and 2nd synchro mesh and the 3rd and 4th synchro mesh. They come in pairs. Now the reason that we are off throttle in sport mode and pulling the downshift paddle is because that is where the synchro mesh is taxed most. The synchro mesh's job at that point is to slow the speed down enough to be able to engage that gear cleanly. Sorry guys, I had to get around the bus there. Now, if you hear it crunch going in, then it's not the end of the world, but certainly the synchro mesh is probably getting tired. And if that's the case, you're looking at around about, say, £3,000 to £4,000 to repair that if you remove the gearbox yourself. So again, not the end of the world, but use it as a negotiation tool. The more you know. Test number 2. What you're probably dying to do, give the car a bit of stick. So if you pull the paddle twice, it'll drop 2 gears, maybe drop another one for good measure. So you guys can hear there, gear changes are quick. For a 90s car, they're exceptional. And what you want to do there, guys, get your foot nice and flat down, pull the upshift paddle, clutch should disengage pretty cleanly, gear should go in, clutch engages. It will be quite aggressive. You can probably see my head going back and forth there because of the single clutch nature, but it should go in clean. Shouldn't be any grinding, shouldn't be any hesitation. Should feel like a Ferrari. So hopefully you're now a bit more at ease with the prospect of buying a 20-year-old Ferrari. Now, of course, this isn't a be-all, end-all video, guys. Check the normal things as well. Check the tyres, check the brakes, everything you would on a normal car. Also check for fluid leaks. So obviously we've got the gearbox right at the back on these cars. We've got the engine just in front of that. This, conveniently, is a Ferrari 360 under tray, and that's going to get in your way of being able to see exactly what's going on under there. But if we are getting fluid coming through that, then it's going to be worth letting a professional have a look at it. So a kind of rotten egg smell, probably gearbox oil, just a kind of common black oil, probably engine oil. But as I say, if that is the case, you maybe want to get it looked at a little bit more closely. Final thing I'll add, guys, is if you are looking at a car, you've maybe seen something you're not too sure about, either send me a message via Instagram or drop a comment below and I will come back to you and we'll try and identify what's going on together. But for now, good luck with finding your perfect Ferrari.